What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over hitboxes making specific sounds on hit. And that might sound a little strange, but we have sound effects for damage that our characters can use randomly. However, some attacks, they may have a specific sound that we want to play when the hitbox collides with the opponent or another object. So in this case, if I walk up to my opponent and I use my medium attack, you'll notice that the character made their damage sound, but that was it. That was the only sound you could hear. Now, if I am to use my light attack, you should notice that another sound plays as well. So the damage sound still plays from the character that's taking damage, which is intended. But additionally, we can add a sound effect on this hit, so that when a collision occurs, that sound is played. Now you'll notice if I don't land the attack, the sound effect does not play. But if I do land the attack, the sound effect plays. You may have something like elemental attacks and maybe you want them to play a certain sound, or maybe a character uses a blade and you want that to make a certain sound when it collides, or just a fist and you want like a meaty hit sound. Whatever the case may be, you may want specific sounds for damage that should play when the actual hitbox makes collision, as opposed to just the character is making their injured sound. You should notice that the block also will play a noise, and it will play a distorted noise, which is just an arbitrary effect that I've added. So I've basically taken the sound effect that we're using for that hitbox, I lowered the pitch so it's a little bit deeper, more indicating that, hey, this attack was blocked. Still makes the sound. That's optional. You can use the same sound for hit or block, or just ignore it for block. It's all up to you, but I'm going to show you how we can set up that type of logic in this episode today. If you guys want to get caught up in the series before you watch this episode, you can check out everything we've done to this point. I'll link this iCard right here in the top right corner so you can check all that out. If you only care about the noises on the collision or just sound effects in general, I'll link you to the first episode of sound effects that we covered in this tutorial series. But with that said, we can go ahead and get started. Starting out today, we want to go to our code, and specifically we want to go to our Hitbox Actor class. So the Hitbox Actor is actually what's going to be the one that stores the sound, because when that hitbox collides, that is when we will play the sound effect. This is important because you could have sound effects on your individual commands at different points of your animations, but the hitbox is what's going to be actually triggering the collision, and since we want the sound effect on take damage, when the character is taking damage, due to that hitbox, we need the hitbox to have the sound that it should play. A single command may have multiple hitboxes that spawn from it, in which case we don't want each hitbox to necessarily use the same sound. You may have additional sounds or unique sounds for each hitbox. So the hitbox really is the best place to store these sound effects. So in our Hitbox Actor class, and specifically in our hitboxactor.h file, we can scroll down to our structure fHitboxData. This is the structure that we use alongside a data table. That way we can fill out all the data for each hitbox and just reference that data when we spawn the hitbox. This structure is essentially the same as you saw it in the last episode where we edited our hitboxes, but I've added one new variable now, and that is a uSoundWave pointer that I've called hitSound. So uSoundWave is the type where we can add an actual sound effect to it, and we'll be able to do this right in the data table, so that's simple enough. The asterisk is for a pointer, and the variable's name is hitSound. I've given it the same U property as the other variables within the structure because we are going to need to not only set it in the data table, but also access it in the blueprint. So the sound wave starts out as a null pointer, which is actually fine because it's okay if there's no sound that plays. That would actually be the default scenario. Not every hitbox is going to need a sound. In fact, most may not even have one. Once we've added that, we also want to go into our fighter template character.h and go down to our take damage function. Now that we will have the sound effect on the individual hitbox, when that hitbox collides with the character, and we call take damage on that character, that is really when we will want to play the sound. So we'll need to have the sound effect that we're going to play passed into that function, or some other way to reference it. So what I've done is gone into my take damage function, and I've scrolled over in my parameter list until the second to last element. I do typically try to keep the variables in my functions, either based on the same variable type or order of importance. So for take damage, I think damage, hit stun, block stun, pushback, launch are all important. Then some other things like the height, the actual hit location, and if it should cause hard knockdown. However you have it set up is fine. If you have it in a different order, don't worry about that. But there is one thing we need to take into account here. Now the hit sound that we pass in very well may be null, empty. We don't give it an actual sound upon collision. If we don't pass a sound effect in to take damage, we're just going to assume that we don't want to play a sound. So we do want to have a default value here. We don't want to try and play an empty sound. That could cause issues for us. To do this, I've added the same type that is found in our hitbox data structure, which is a U sound wave pointer. I've also called it hit sound. I just have an underscore here. And I'm setting it equal to null pointer. Basically, it's empty by default. So if we don't pass anything into this function for it, it's okay. We'll just know that it's empty, in which case we won't try and play the sound. There is one thing that matters with the order here, though, and that is when you do default parameters like this, where you give them a default value, so hit sound equals null pointer, or should cause hard knockdown equals false, they have to be at the end of the parameter list. So you can't put the U sound wave all the way up here, for example. The default values have to be last. So it doesn't matter the order you put these two in, but they have to be at the end of the list next to each other. Simple enough though. We've now added a hit sound parameter to our take damage function. If we go to our fighter template character.cpp, we have to make sure that the take damage function also supports that in here. So I'm scrolling down to take damage. Make sure you update the parameter list. So I'm going to scroll over, and you can see I've now added U sound wave pointer hit sound. Remember that in the CPP, you don't have to actually put default values, so just saying hit sound here, same as should cause hard knockdown, is perfectly fine. You don't have to put like equals false, equals null pointer, just add it to the parameter list. Now in here, we can actually set up the logic for how we want it to play without ever knowing the sound. It's not really important that we know what sound effect is going to play, we just have to think about it logically. So the whole point of this episode is that when we hit the opponent with a hitbox, a sound effect is going to play, a special sound effect for that hitbox. I've also gone one step further to do that additional blocking noise that is just a distorted version of the regular noise. Because of this, we're going to want to play two different sound effects, or really the same sound effect, with different parameters in the standard take damage and in the take damage when they were blocking. The best way to go about this is to simply go into each of our possible conditions where we want to play a sound effect, and just play a separate sound effect, or again, the same sound effect but with different parameters. Starting with where we make sure that the character was not able to block this attack, meaning they took full damage to the attack, we then went to check to see if there was the counter hit property, meaning they were hit while in their attack started or attack startup state. Regardless if it's a counter hit or not, I'm playing the same sound on hit, so ignoring the if and the else, going to the logic after that, we're going to play the standard hit sound unmodified. It's just the actual file that we pass into this hitbox. If you want to put it exactly where I do, I put it above where I check for the super meter amount, and if the player health is less than or equal to 0 to see if they're defeated. But it doesn't really matter, just as long as it's within the first if statement here, checking for if the character wasn't able to block, and it's not in a specific if or else related to the counter hit. It's within that shared logic section below. The actual logic here is very simple. We just make sure that there is a hit sound. If it's null pointer, it will fail. So basically, if we don't have a sound, we won't play anything, which is good. That's what we want. There's actually a function we can use to play a sound effect that Unreal gives us, but we need to access this uGameplayStatics class before we can call the function. To access this, we need to add an include at the top of the file. And I've just added it to the bottom of my list here, and I've included Kismet/GameplayStatics.h. If you include this, you'll get access to that static class. With this, we will be able to call the function you saw below, so we'll scroll back down to that point. And we're going to call it uGameplayStatics : play sound 2D, and then for the parameters, you have to pass it a context. Basically, that just means that we have to give it some sort of object to know where it's going to be playing this sound on or from. And since it's a sound 2D, it doesn't really matter as long as we just give it the world as a whole. It will know to play it from the world, which is perfectly fine. Again, it's a two-dimensional sound, doesn't have distance or anything. So I'm just passing it get world. And then the actual sound effect that we want to play, which is the hit sound. Assuming this is valid, like we checked above, we can just pass it right in, and it will play that sound effect for us. Now let's go down to the else, where we determined that the character was able to block. This else right here, where we are setting reduced damage, that means that the character successfully blocked, but they're receiving some chip damage. Right now, it's basically just half of whatever damage they received. In here, there's no logic about counter hit, so we don't have to worry about, branching paths and anything like that. I just put it directly below where the player is having their health reduced. So we want to do the same thing where we check to make sure hit sound even exists, because if it doesn't, we don't want to play it. But if it does, we want to call U gameplay statics play sound 2D, passing it the world as the context, and the hit sound. However, play sound 2D also has more parameters. It has a volume and a pitch. It has some other things after that as well for concurrency, like if you want to play one sound over another or stop one sound from playing before you play this sound. We're not worried about that right now, and we probably won't ever be for this specific scenario. But we do care about the volume and the pitch. Mainly, I actually only care about the pitch. The volume is before the pitch in the parameter list, and because of that, we actually do need to put the volume in here. Remember what I just said about the default values earlier? Technically, the volume and the pitch are default values. As you can see in the other play sound 2D we didn't pass anything in. So it's just going to play 1.0 volume, meaning, regular 100%. Pitch is the same. It starts at 1.0, which is 100% of the standard pitch. Here you can see we are passing values. So we have to pass in the volume and then the pitch. So even if you just want to edit the pitch like me, make sure you have a 1.0 here for the volume. If you hover over these functions, a lot of times they will give you the parameter list. Right now you can't see it on here because I am running the editor through here, but you can right click on the function and go to the definition. This is what play sound 2D looks like in the actual engine code within gameplaystatics.cpp. Here's our world context. Here's the actual sound that we are playing. Then there is a volume multiplier and a pitch multiplier. You can also edit things like start time, and here's the concurrency I was talking about, as well as an owning actor. If you want to pass in any of these other things like owning actor, by all means, go for it, but it's really not required. So in this case, I just want the volume and the pitch multipliers. So once again, going back, the volume is 1.0, and the pitch, I've just decreased it or cut it in half. So it's 0.5. It's 50% of what the pitch normally is. With that out of the way, we are good to open up the editor, so go ahead and do that. Once the editor is open, we want to go to our data table. So I'm going to go to my mutant hitbox data. And you can put these hit sounds on whatever hitboxes you want. So I have some hit sounds that I was given from one of the free marketplace items, so I'm just using them for now. I'm actually using like a reflex spark for this hit, but I thought it sounded pretty good. So basically, go to any hitbox in the data table. I'm not really going to be doing it for proximity, but you could. It's not going to cause any issues if you do it through proximity. It's just that the proximity hitbox doesn't even deal damage anyway, so you'd have to do it on collision with the proximity hitbox, which isn't an issue, but typically you don't really want that to happen because unless you're in practice mode, the players aren't going to see the proximity hitboxes, and so they're not going to think that the character should be hit at that point, so no sound effect should really be played there. But it is up to you. You could go ahead and do it if you want. I'm going to focus on my strike hitboxes. So I already set up the first one, but we can set up any of them. They're super easy. Essentially, all you have to do is select the sound effect from a drop-down or by actually giving it a file path. The hit sound should now be a column here, and you just click anywhere in the hitbox that you want, then scroll down to your row editor, look at your hit sound, and then you can select whatever sound you want. I have all these sounds in here, but you may have less, you may have more, doesn't matter. Pick whatever sounds you want. It's literally that simple. I've added, this particular sound, but really just because I listened to some sounds and they sounded good. I could pick any sound. So I could pick, which one is this? I chose Reflect Spark 01 for my light attack. So for my medium, we can go ahead and pick Reflect Spark 02. And there we go. It's literally that simple. You just save it, and now that hit sound is attached to this data table for that hitbox. Now let's go into our Anim BP for our character. For me, that's Mutant Anim BP. Now once it loads, go to where your Anim notifies are to spawn these hitboxes. So I happen to have 2 notifies that are both tied to the same data, but that's really not important. You'll probably only ever have 1. This is just because I was being lazy and I didn't utilize 2 different notifies. I was fine with them having the same data. So this is my rifle punch. This is actually my light attack. I can show you this because I have Mutant Rifle Punch, and this is the light attack right here. So you can see I have M Rifle Punch active, which is the notify I'm using here. So when the strike hitbox comes out, we were already getting the data table row from Mutant Hitbox data earlier in the series. Essentially, we're grabbing data from this data table at this row, and I'm breaking the row to get all the individual variables. Now for the create active hitbox, we have everything passed in here except for this hit sound now. The hit sound will be here, but create active hitbox won't have a parameter for that. So what we're going to need to do is add one. If you click on your create active hitbox or go into the create active hitbox function, either way, and click on the purple starting node here, you will be able to get your input parameters. The only new one today is the hit sound, so we can press the plus to add a new parameter, and we can change the type to sound wave. That is the type that we had in the data table and that take damage has in the character, and we want an object reference to it. I've called it hit sound, and now my parameter is here. So simply enough, take the hit sound from the broken hitbox data from the data table and pass it into your new parameter within your create active hitbox function. From here, we actually spawn the hitbox inside of the create active hitbox function. And a lot of this logic you've seen before. At one point, we call set members and hitbox data, which is where we set all the different values for this hitbox before actually setting it to be active. Well, now you'll have a hit sound. It may not be present in the set members and hitbox data because sometimes they are hidden by default when you create new variables. If you don't see yours here, just click on set members and hitbox data. Make sure hit sound is checked as pin. Now you should see it here, in which case we just want to pass the parameter hit sound coming into this function into that. So it's this light blue line, and you can see it goes from the start of the function into the set members node. Okay, it goes down here. I've added some reroute nodes here and goes up into hit sound. So essentially, we've spawned a hitbox in this function, and on top of assigning all the other variables for it, we've also assigned the hit sound variable on the hitbox. Everything else in this function can remain the same, although I am going to actually clean this up. Don't have to change anything else in here. This is all still good, just showing you nothing else has changed. Now it's actually very simple, and if you want, you can do the same thing to projectile and throw hitboxes. They're a little bit easier than the active hitbox because there isn't so much going on for them. For example, my spawn homing thunderball, that is that charge electricity ball that I have. I'm using the data table for it already. I can go ahead and add a hit sound to my create projectile hitbox if I would like. Just trying to clean this up a little bit. And to do that, it's very simple. We go to our create projectile hitbox, we add our variable, we change it to be a sound wave object reference, and we type in hit sound. Then we pass hit sound from the break hitbox data into the create projectile hitbox. And from here we can go into create projectile hitbox, and it's got the same basic setup where we have a set members in hitbox data. And so I will click on that node. I will make sure that hit sound is checked so that it is present. Sorry, I'm trying to keep everything clean while I'm going through this because, of course, as we add more, it always gets a little bit messier. I'm going to drag my hit sound into my set members in hitbox data. And I'm just going to add some reroute nodes so that it looks a little bit nicer. Something like that. And now hit sound is set for projectiles as well. Throws are a little bit different because the hitbox you spawn for a throw is actually for the grab of the throw. If you grab the opponent, then you go into the throw. So you wouldn't necessarily have the actual throw collision sound on the hitbox, but you could have a grab collision sound. That is very viable. And we have our break hitbox data here where we have a hit sound. And for create throw hitbox, we can add a new parameter. It's a U sound wave object reference. Hit sound, and then you can pass in hit sound from the break hitbox data. You know what we're going to do next. We're going to go into that create throw hitbox, and we have our hit sound parameter here. So we go over to our set members in hitbox data, and we check hit sound to make sure it is visible. Then we just take the hit sound parameter passed into the function and pass it into hit sound in set members in hitbox data. Then I'm going to add one more reroute node here. Just like that, our strike, projectile, and throw hitboxes can all have sound effects. There's one other thing we need to do, and that is to go into our hitbox actor BP. Once we're in our hitbox actor BP, we have our event check collision, which as of last episode is being checked on tick. When the hitbox collides with the opponent, it will automatically go into the collision logic. Since the sound effect is playing on take damage, all we need to do is now pass in the hit sound variable into all the places where take damage was called. So you can do two things. You can actually just search for take damage and go to all of these and pass in hit sound, or we can find them one at a time just by going through the graph. Either way is perfectly fine. It's not an issue. What I've done is gone to the rightmost area of check collision, and you should see this where you grab your actual data from your structure on this hitbox. And your hitbox data hit sound will be here now. You can just plug this directly into the hit sound that is on take damage. This will work for strike hitboxes. Again, proximity isn't currently doing it, but if you do add sound effects to proximity hitboxes, feel free to pass the hit sound in there. Then there's throw, which won't call take damage because this is just for the grab. So if you want to play a sound effect for the grab, you could do it here and now. You could play the sound effect in here. Or you could actually use the hit sound that we set up here in the grab. And since it's not playing right away, you could pass it into the take damage that occurs on the anim notify when the character lands. So if we go to our backward throw, or actually mutant thrown, we have this anim notify that is apply throw damage. And so if we go to apply throw damage within our anim notify, this is where we were dealing damage on the character when they landed from the throw, and we were actually using our hitbox data already. we can simply drag the hit sound into take damage. And now our throw can have an additional sound for the landing. Again, if you want the grab to have a sound effect, you could play it here instead. Right here. If you don't want to do it in code, you could just do play sound 2D and literally select your sound asset. The only thing that's left now is going through all of our take damage functions and making sure we set the hit sound properly. Now I have a few take damage nodes from our old logic that I kept just for reference that we're not using anymore and we're not going to use anymore. Of course, I don't have to set the hit sound on them because they're not even active. So I'm going to skip them in mine. You can definitely delete this, by the way, if you have kept yours. I just kept it for the tutorial, but we're not going to be using it. So I can skip my first 2 take damages. The third one in this list here is actually part of my projectile collision. Take damage is already using a lot of the elements from the hitbox data, so we can just use hit sound and pass it in there. Take note, you can also just pass it into the bottom take damage here, which is probably the 4th one. Now there's only one more, that's the 5th one, and that's the one we already set up. So all of our take damage nodes now have the hit sound passed into it. So if there is one on that hitbox, it will play at the appropriate time. Now the only other thing we need to do is make sure that our hitboxes that we want to use do have the hit sound included. The homing thunderbolt, hitbox 1, was one of the notifies that we use the data table from. So if we put a sound effect on here, let's just say reflect spark 3, because why not? And for the backward throw damage hitbox, which is the one that we grab the data from when the character actually lands on the ground after the throw, that was the other one we used for the throw hitbox. So we'll want to use something like reflect spark 4. Now all of our hitboxes that we're going to be testing here have sound effects. So I can go into my practice mode and I can select my characters. I will skip through my stage intros and my character entrances. And you can see that I will attack my opponent. The proximity hitbox doesn't make any noise. The strike hitbox does. The blocking makes a different sound than the standard hit. Then we have our projectile, our homing thunderbolt, which will hit the opponent and make some noise. And then we can do it again. But I will block with this character. Then I can also throw my opponent, and noise occurs upon collision. And block with that won't really happen because you can't block a throw. You can't block and take damage from the throw. So those are all of our cases right there. I also added a sound effect to the medium. There you go. Now you can see all of the cases that I have currently set up. And that is how you can add special sound effects to your hitboxes in your fighting game tutorial series. If this helped you and taught you what you wanted to know, then please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support. I am so incredibly grateful, and I am so excited to see what you guys come up with in your fighting games. If you had any questions about this or any issues following this tutorial, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and I would be happy to assist you and get you sorted so that you can continue on with your game. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.